Good morning, everyone. I'm Asha Nayaswami, and we're continuing with what we're now calling Living in the Light. Satsangs with Asha, conversations with all of you. Let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to understand on ever deeper levels the simple joy of living for you. Help us to see past the compelling desires of our own nature to the still small voice, the single candle flame of devotion, of your presence within us. Help us to live in harmony with our higher selves and be an instrument of your loving presence in all that we do. Om. Peace. Amen. We're talking about working with your emotions, and I do feel a little bit like I've because once you step into this whole question of working with your emotions, I think that the COVID pandemic might end before I reach the end of it. And I'm not sure I want to spend the rest of my mornings here talking about this single subject. So I shall talk about it at least all of today and maybe another day or two. But there are many other classes, including Shanti is giving a class on how to work with your emotions, even through Ananda Palo Alto as we speak. And hers, it might even be a year-long course that she's giving, and I highly recommend it. And also other archives in Ananda Palo Alto and on my own website. Because it's a really simple matter. Here I am talking about difficult emotions, and the obvious question is, well, but what do I do about it? Because what difference does it make how clearly we can speak about it when they take over our lives and begin to operate, and they grab the controls and begin to force us in certain directions? That's the moment when we need help. When we're calmly considering it is different. So I have to speak a little bit about the whole way that I approach these things. I find for myself that clarity of mind is very helpful. I feel if I can get clear concepts, then I can tell the difference in the heat of the moment between wisdom and delusion. That doesn't necessarily mean that in the heat of the moment I can choose wisdom. But if even a part of me recognizes that there is wisdom and this isn't it, it's that tiny thread of maintaining the observer that, at least in my experience, has gradually enabled me to turn the whole ship. You know, shifting something like our emotional reactions to life is really like turning a gigantic ocean liner. I was going to say the Titanic, which of course sank. I don't know if that makes it a good or bad example, but like turning the Titanic, but the wheel you're turning it with is about as big as a kid's bicycle. So a tricycle wheel, what I'm trying to say, you know what I mean, a toy. You just have to keep working and working and working, and you have the feeling that nothing is happening. But a great deal is happening. Often I would use the image when teaching people about meditation, about the wild, out of control mind, which is what we're talking about when our emotions run away with us. It's like being on a horse, and the horse has the bit between its teeth. And the first time you give a little tug and, whoa, horsey, please, stop running. He's not going to. because he has the bit between his teeth and he feels the power of it. He feels that he's in charge and he's going where he wants to go. But if you keep working with it, just keep the bit between his teeth for a horse is the bit presses on the horse's tongue, and that pressure communicates with the horse if he's cooperative, and it's a little uncomfortable, so he responds to it. When you have the bit between your teeth, the horse figures out that he can clamp down on that metal bar in his mouth. And if he can close his teeth on it, then nothing you do has any effect on him because he's holding it tighter than you. So you have to win it back from him. He has to give it up, or you have to overpower him one way or another. But that's what happens to us, is that the image actually works. It's like our own conscience and our own higher self. It's sensitive. We make the tongue is a good image because so much of this comes out of your mouth. It feels wrong. You feel like you need to be turning another way. But then every so often, the other side of you just clamps down on that bit and refuses to feel or heed those words. There's this feeling of that this time I'm finally right, rather than the opposite of this time I'm really wrong. It's like this time I'm finally right because it feels so good, because it does in the short run. So having clear pictures, this is what I was trying to say. And so my contribution to to my own, and I hope to a few other people's welfare, is clarity of mind. And there's many, many techniques and many other ways to do this, but my particular personal leaning, and therefore contribution, is to have a clear picture in our head of what's happening. So at least after the battle, in the Bhagavad Gita, it's after the battle that we introspect. While you're fighting the battle, you're in the battle, and you can't think that clearly. But after the battle is over, we consider, we introspect. What did I do today? What happened? Who was at war? Who won? And if our introspection is polluted by emotion, if our introspection is merely a pretense at getting at the truth, but is actually just another exercise in proving I'm right, then we perpetuate the problem. Or, as I was speaking yesterday, if the introspection merely becomes the forming of a complex, oh, I'm so terrible, I'm never going to succeed, I try so hard and it never works, and I just feel so awful, and we think that we're doing something to fix it, because after all, we feel so bad. I know classically, and this is very important for this whole story, you've heard me tell this story before, but it's perfectly apt. My friend did something really stupid, just, one of those moments. It caused a certain amount of embarrassment and then inconvenience for Swamiji, as he had to sort of correct some wrong and difficult impressions that had been created by her words. And it wasn't, nobody died, nobody left the spiritual path, but it was difficult and embarrassing. And a week later, she was still moping around, and Swami sort of noticed her bad mood and said, what's wrong with you? And then she spoke with great lament about this bad thing that she'd done, and how could she be so stupid and caused him so much inconvenience and hurt this person's feeling. And she expected Swamiji to comfort her. I mean, that was sort of how we are. Oh, I'm so bad, and we expect someone to comfort us. But instead, he just very calmly but quite firmly said, how egoic. And she was offended because what she heard was how egotistical. And egotistical in the normal sense means how proud. She says, I'm not proud of what I did. I'm terribly ashamed of it. And he clarified egoic, how focused on the ego you are, what an exaggerated sense of yourself you have. And then these are the words. You have such an exaggerated sense of your own perfection that when you made a mistake, it was so shocking to you, and just so unexpected and shocking, that a week later he said, you're still worshiping it. Now, I repeat this story really often because I go through this I've gone through this many times in my life, just trying to sort of work my way through what exactly that means. Swami put it to me by saying, you think that being guilty, you're actually getting over something. He said, but all you're doing is exhausting yourself with guilt and not using any energy actually to change yourself. I didn't understand that for about 15 years, is the only way I can put it. Because I was so egoic. I had just this very false idea, and this is what I was talking about yesterday, of what the spiritual path is. And so this is what I was getting at in great depth, going through complexes and so on yesterday, talking about the chakras, talking about the subconscious energy. And this is the good news and this is the bad news. This is the spiritual path. This sort of endless realization that I don't really quite know what I'm doing yet, and I'm constantly being blindsided by parts of myself that I didn't know were there. Because see, one of the reasons that it's upsetting to us in itself because it's extremely unpleasant. We often destroy relationships that are very precious to us. We worry about destroying ones that are precious to us that are still hanging in there. So that's bad enough. But then we also decide that we're failing. We're failing on the spiritual path. We're failing as a person. We're failing everybody around us. That was what my guilt was. Actually, I don't know what my guilt was. I would just always feel so guilty. Like, how did I dare to misbehave? And it was both depressing and really comical when I finally had to realize that the whole issue was, this is actually who I was. There was no point in feeling guilty, ashamed, embarrassed, or even like a failure. It's like, feeble and unimpressive as this performance is, this is actually my best. I mean, it was so liberating, even though it was horrible. It was so liberating when I realized that, because I had spent years, 15 years at least, of my spiritual life pretending to be somebody I wasn't. In my own heart, I was pretending to be somebody I wasn't. It's like I was a very reactive, emotional person. And I was protecting thousands of God knows what's, just desperately always trying to hold up some image to myself and to the world. And it was just like, therefore, a great deal of my energy spiritually was just running in a circle. And the Swamiji once said to another man he was a journalist, and he said something to Swamiji about how he keeps changing spiritual paths. He said he finds a teacher and he learns a new set of teachings, and it's so satisfying to him, and he's so inspired, and he does it for a while. And then somehow it doesn't seem to work as well, so he goes and finds another one and gets excited for a while. And Swami said, but he said he keeps noticing that he's not making, he feels like he's doing something, but he doesn't really see real progress. And Swami said, yes, he said, going in circles does give a person a certain sense of accomplishment. He said, the bigger the circle, the bigger the sense of accomplishment. And that's what I finally saw, the syndrome of slipping off of my center, feeling terrible about slipping off of my center, resolving to do better, then slipping off again, resolving to do better, lamenting at my failure, on and on and on. The more I ran in circles, the more I felt like I was accomplishing something. But the entire issue was egoism, which is having a distorted sense of my own reality. This is why in all the spiritual books, we always talk about how little we are. The great saints always talk about how small they are, how child, that I'm just a little child. I'm just a little moth. I'm just a little nothing. And you see these great souls, and it's very hard to really understand. I would laugh so much at what happened with Swami sometimes. somebody would compliment him on something, and he would say, well, Master did it through me, or God is the doer, but in any case, he would shift the blame, shift the responsibility to something that wasn't him, because he knew it wasn't him. But then whoever was complimenting him would insist that he take personal credit. But somebody had to be the instrument, somebody had to be the one who did it. And then Swami would sort of try to say, well, anyone can be an instrument. Yes, but you were the instrument. And finally, of course, he would just, there was no point in fighting it. But I thought, let's be helpful to each other. That's not, when we're trying to shed egoic identity, let's cooperate. Because what finally frees us, and I'm not going to use the word freed because it would be absurd for me to say that. But what begins to free us and give us some perspective is when we stop being so surprised. It's like, oh yeah, here we are again. This is something that I do. This is not something that I'm going to do forever, but this is something that I do. One of my favorite ways of thinking about this is, well, I have several, and many of you have heard them, but here we are. There's actions that we commit, and there's a whole encyclopedia full of actions that we commit. This whole question started from a mother with small children. That sometimes the children just seem so willfully disobedient or just willfully troublesome, whether they are actually being that way, which sometimes they are, gives them great pleasure to be mischievous, but or whether they're just being themselves, but today I don't have the energy to think it's any fun, and you just have this desire to make them stop. When I work for about 6 weeks every year in our school, making the costumes for our school theater production. I don't sew them all. I only sew very few of them, in fact. But I organize it and I collect it and I get other people to sew and so on. And so I work very closely with 80 children from kindergarten age up through middle school. And I really enjoy it, except I'm not a trained Education for Life teacher. And so my fallback position is I am bigger, stronger, and louder than you, and you're going to do it. But it's amazing to me sometimes how I just want them to stop, and I want to use my willpower to make them to stop if they're doing the things that they do that you don't want them to do. And it just rises right out of you to try to impose your will upon these children. And of course, it's not a good idea, especially when it's the older children and they get my number really fast. And our children in our school are very good, but they're also very well, brilliantly brought up is the word I want to use, brought up in the school library. And they don't fall for my dictator approach. They have too much self-respect to fall for it. And so I always lose. I have to retreat back and get one of the teachers who knows what to do to tell me what to do. So I commit actions that I do commit them, but I'm not committed to them. And that internally is all the difference in the world. I'm acting from delusion because it says in the Gita, we are compelled against our will until the energy that has been dedicated to that wrong action wears itself out. And it wears itself out faster the clearer we are about the fact that this is not the right way to behave. We don't spend any energy saying that we're justified. Yes, that particular middle schooler was a notorious tester of limits. And even some of my well-trained colleagues would run up against the wall with that particular middle schooler. There was lots of reasons why I was pushed to that point. But once I crossed the line, it was not about anybody but me. And the first thing I have to say is, I did it. I did it. There it was. You may have behaved awfully, which is called true but irrelevant, because it is true that you behaved awfully, but so did I. And just the ease, and to just in myself, without feeling that that's a death sentence to myself, or that now I am condemned to hell, or now it's absolutely necessary for me to fall into a secondary pit of despair and sadness and anger at myself and running old tapes of how I got here. That is the bigger problem. And I know that's what I said yesterday too. Now, is that easy to overcome? Well, I think the Titanic can be turned with this little child's toy of a steering wheel. It will be turned if we have committed ourselves to becoming different, and if that commitment is explicit between ourselves and Divine Mother. It can't be, oh, I'm going to get myself organized and then I'll bring myself to God. It has to be, Mommy, I need your help. This is just a mess. I mean, we're talking about little children, and, one of the things that a mother responds to or a father responds to, Daddy, will you help me? And the thing about God's help for us is He won't interfere. It's really quite annoying. He won't interfere. God allows us to play out our free will as long as we want it. There's a story told about Master when someone agreed, Master, the devotee wanted to be a disciple, and Master accepted the disciple, and the disciple accepted that he would obey his guru, and Master rubbed his hands together, now we can get to work. Master said, every night when the devotees were sleeping, he would go into the minds of every disciple and just sort of explore their subconscious. And I mean, I don't know exactly what that means. You have these animated pictures of some little guy with a pith helmet sort of entering into your mind and mining around with little tools. That was not how Master did it. But it was, and this is what Master said, he would never have entered if he hadn't been invited. But the disciple invited the guru. I'm here, sir. I want you to transform me. I think a lot of the work that we have to do is to work on deeper and deeper levels of that invitation. Because we can say it with one part of ourselves, but if one really, really tries to open heart, mind, and spirit to the transforming presence of God. Well, I was in seclusion once, and I was meditating, and I was doing what one does, offering myself into the divine light. And I suddenly had this thought, oh, I think I'll let Divine Mother love me. If you knew how much God loves you, you would die for joy. That's what that wonderful French saint said. So I thought I would try to find out how much God loves me and see if I would die for joy. So I concentrated on opening my heart to Divine Mother's loving presence. And it was exceedingly dramatic to me how much of my heart was closed. And if you had asked me in words to answer that, I wouldn't have been able to answer you truthfully. I thought I was open. But when I was really meditating and I was in the vibration of meditation sufficiently that I could feel at least a touch of what God's presence felt like, I could feel, it was in my heart chakra, it was physically in my body at the heart center. And what I could feel is I could feel this contrary vibration, that there was this wonderful vibration of Divine Mother, and then inside of me there was a contrary vibration right over my heart, just protecting my heart. And it was a really interesting meditation. And I had to think, what is this vibration? And it wasn't hard to figure out. It was deep disappointments from past incarnations that I had never transcended, that I had simply buried, and therefore I was still very much afraid of them, and I had to keep the lid on that box for sure. It was all the people who I thought had mistreated me, the ones I could remember in this life and from past incarnations, probably the same people. Just like, well, I was right and you were really wrong. You shouldn't have done that to me. That wasn't the right thing for you to have done. And on why I was correct. People that I was angry at, that I just still wanted to tell them what I thought. I mean, those are a few of them. My favorite came out to be, somebody owes me an apology. Just, I want to be right. I want to be seen. I want my ego to be verified. I don't want to be hurt. I want to transcend the tragedies of this world without ever really having to face them. And all of that just made a vibration where Divine Mother couldn't get in. So no wonder I'm reactive. No wonder I'm emotional. And so one of the ways that we have to work with our emotions is we have to ask ourselves over and over again, who am I really? What am I protecting? And work completely independently. These are visualizations and prayers of just trying to open our hearts to God. Don't just say, I have opened my heart. How much of my heart have I opened? How much am I still holding back? This is what Kriya is for. This is why I say this is a years-long course. Everything about our spiritual path is about working with your emotions, because our emotions are our divine feelings attached to some limited object, and then trying to squeeze out of that limited reality an infinite level of experience. And it can't happen. But we've spent a long time on this, a very long time on this. When I think even now about, feelings that have never been transcended but only buried and are protected, it causes a certain level of nervousness, not a fraction of what it did earlier in my life, but a certain level of nervousness. I mean, think how tragic this world is. And all of that we've been through. We've been through all of it. When we let Divine Mother in, we let go of our human perspective. We simply surrender our human perspective and we see it from her point of view. And in Mother's point of view is, I know you're having a tantrum. I know you're in great pain, dear. I know that you think that this is a horrible thing that's happening, but you have to trust me. I know what's best for you. And if we really trust Divine Mother, we really believe that she knows what's best for us, then why are we nervous? Why are we afraid? Well, that's what she's there to get us through. If I'm holding my mother's hand, if I know that my mother will protect me, why am I still afraid? These are very interesting questions, and not questions that you can answer quickly. This is the spiritual path. The spiritual path is not to say, well, Divine Mother's taking care of me. We all know Divine Mother. We just accept Divine Mother's way. Well, that's the beginning, because that's true. But the step after that is, help me to actually do that. It's very tender and that's very private. Help me to actually do that. And then all of our emotions are genuinely transmuted into an actual experience of God. And everything from that point on begins to change. So God bless you, my friends.